The silver pendant around Fiona Whitaker's neck caught the last light of dusk as she hurried toward the Silvercrest dance hall, her steps quick with anticipation and worry. In Dry Creek, Arizona Territory, 1885, opportunities for joy were as sparse as rainfall, and tonight's dance was her first chance in months to forget the harsh realities of frontier life, if only she could arrive before Mrs. Holloway bolted the doors. The small mining town had sprung up 5 years earlier when silver was discovered in the nearby hills. Now it stood as a collection of wooden buildings, false-fronted and weather-beaten, clinging to existence as the mines slowly dried up. Fiona had arrived just 8 months ago after her father's death left her with nothing but debts and a ticket west to live with her aunt. At 22, she was neither young enough to be carefree nor established enough to command respect in town. Working as a seamstress in her aunt's shop, she'd gained a reputation for fine work, but also unwanted attention from certain men who viewed any unmarried woman as fair game. As she approached the dance hall, Fiona smoothed her simple blue dress, the one she'd spent 3 nights sewing, foregoing sleep to finish the delicate embroidery along the collar. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly, though a few stubborn strands had already escaped in the evening breeze. The sounds of a fiddle and piano spilled into the street as she reached for the door, but it swung open before her fingers touched the handle. Mrs. Elizabeth Holloway, the self-appointed moral guardian of Dry Creek, stood in the doorway, her substantial frame blocking entry. "Miss Whitaker," she said, her voice carrying over the music, "I'm afraid I cannot allow you inside." Fiona stepped back, confusion washing over her face. "I don't understand, Mrs. Holloway. I have my ticket." She held up the small paper square she'd purchased 3 days prior. "That was before certain information came to my attention." Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Holloway and I have standards for this establishment." Fiona's cheeks burned. "What information?" "Sheriff Tanner informed us of your conversation with Mr. Alexander Reynolds yesterday." Mrs. Holloway's voice dropped to a hiss. "Unmarried women do not entertain private meetings with men of his reputation." "It wasn't," Fiona started, indignation rising in her throat. "Mr. Reynolds was merely ordering a shirt for his brother's wedding." "We spoke on my aunt's porch in broad daylight. Nevertheless," Mrs. Holloway cut her off with a wave of her hand, "we cannot risk the reputation of our dance hall. Perhaps when you show better judgment regarding your associations, we'll reconsider." The door was closing when a leather-gloved hand caught it. Preston Blackwell, standing nearly 6 feet tall, pushed it back open with casual strength. His dark hair was neatly combed for the occasion, though his sun-bronzed face and the dust on his boots revealed his profession. "Evening, Mrs. Holloway," he said, tipping his hat. "Seems there's some confusion at your door." "Mr. Blackwell," Mrs. Holloway acknowledged stiffly. Though Preston had worked as the foreman at the Triple Diamond Ranch for 3 years, the town's elite still viewed cowboys with suspicion necessary for the cattle trade, but too rough for polite society. "No confusion," Mrs. Holloway continued. "Miss Whitaker is not welcome tonight." Preston's hazel eyes moved from Mrs. Holloway to Fiona, taking in her carefully made dress and the humiliation coloring her cheeks. "Is that so?" His voice remained pleasant, but something in it made Mrs. Holloway straighten her spine. "Seems a waste of fine music and a finer dress." "Our establishment has standards, Mr. Blackwell." "As do I, madam." He offered his arm to Fiona. "Miss Whitaker, if they've banished you from the dance hall, then we'll dance in the dust outside." The boldness of his statement left Fiona momentarily speechless. She'd exchanged polite greetings with Preston Blackwell perhaps a dozen times when he came to town for supplies, but they were hardly more than acquaintances. "Mr. Blackwell," Mrs. Holloway sputtered, "surely you don't intend to create our own dance." "That's exactly what I intend." He smiled at Fiona. "What do you say, Miss Whitaker? The music carries just fine to the street." Several faces had appeared in the doorway behind Mrs. Holloway, curiosity drawing them to the commotion. Fiona felt their stares and knew that by morning, the entire town would be talking regardless of what she chose. Pride straightened her shoulders. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Blackwell." She placed her hand on his offered arm, and Preston led her away from the door, into the center of the dirt street where the glow from the dance hall's windows created pools of light. "You didn't have to do that," Fiona said quietly. "No," he agreed, positioning himself across from her as the fiddle inside struck up a lively tune. "But I've never much cared for people who appoint themselves judges of others." Then, as the townspeople watched in astonishment, Preston Blackwell led Fiona Whitaker in a dance that would change both their lives forever. They moved in perfect rhythm, Preston's steps confident despite the uneven ground. Fiona followed his lead, gradually forgetting the onlookers as they swept through the patterns of the dance. "You dance well for a cowboy," she remarked, surprised by his grace. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," he replied with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Said a man should know how to move with purpose, whether on horseback or a dance floor." As they turned, Fiona noticed more people gathering at the dance hall windows. Some faces showed disapproval, but others, particularly the younger men and women, seemed delighted by their impromptu rebellion. "They're all staring," she murmured. "Let them," Preston said. "If they're watching us, they're missing their own dance." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Preston adjusted his hold, his hand respectfully at her waist. The closeness made Fiona acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of leather and pine, the strength in his arms as he guided her through the steps. "Why did you really do this, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked as they moved across the street. "You hardly know me, Preston," he corrected. "And sometimes a moment presents itself where you can stand for what's right or walk away. I've never been good at walking away." He paused. "Besides, I've noticed you around town. The way you help old Mrs. Jenkins with her groceries even though she never thanks you. How you gave that stray dog half your lunch last market day." Fiona looked up, surprised. "You saw that. I see more than people think." His voice was soft now, meant only for her. "And I didn't like seeing injustice done to someone who deserves better." Before Fiona could respond, the dance hall doors burst open. Thomas Holloway, Elizabeth's husband and owner of the dance hall, strode out with the sheriff close behind. "This is disrupting my business, Blackwell," Holloway declared. "Take your socializing elsewhere." Sheriff Tanner, a heavy-set man with a perpetually sour expression, rested his hand meaningfully on his holstered revolver. "Move along now, folks. No congregating in the street after dark." Preston stopped dancing but kept Fiona's hand in his. "There's no law against dancing, Sheriff." "There's laws against creating disturbances," Tanner countered. "And that's what I'm seeing." Several dancers had followed Holloway outside, including Alexander Reynolds, the very man whose innocent business with Fiona had sparked this trouble. His expensive suit and golden watch chain marked him as one of the remaining prosperous mine owners. "Seems a harmless bit of fun," Reynolds remarked, his voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern education. The lady was merely denied entry to a private establishment. "No cause for official intervention." Sheriff Tanner's expression darkened. Even he knew better than to openly contradict one of the town's wealthiest citizens. "Just keeping the peace, Mr. Reynolds." "And admirably so," Reynolds smiled thinly. "However, as I'm hosting this evening's entertainment, I believe I have some say in the matter." He turned to Holloway. "Thomas, surely we can accommodate Miss Whitaker. I assure you, our business interaction was entirely proper." Holloway looked between Reynolds and his wife, who had emerged to stand in the doorway, her face pinched with displeasure. "Alexander," Mrs. Holloway began. "We agreed, we misunderstood," Reynolds cut her off smoothly. "A simple mistake that need not ruin everyone's evening." The standoff stretched for several uncomfortable seconds before Holloway relented with a curt nod. "Very well. Miss Whitaker may attend." Fiona felt Preston's hand tighten slightly around hers. She glanced up to see his jaw set in a hard line as he regarded Reynolds. "Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Reynolds," Fiona said carefully, "but I find I prefer the company out here." She turned to Preston. "Shall we continue our dance?" A flash of surprise crossed Reynolds' face before he recovered with a practiced smile. "As you wish, Miss Whitaker." "The invitation remains open." As Reynolds and the others returned inside, Preston led Fiona away from the dance hall, toward the small town square where a lone oak tree provided some shelter from curious eyes. "You didn't have to refuse on my account," he said once they were alone. "I didn't," Fiona replied. "Mrs. Holloway showed her true feelings. I wouldn't enjoy myself knowing I wasn't truly welcome." She hesitated. "Besides, I owe you a complete dance for your gallantry." Preston's smile returned. "No debt between us, Miss Whitaker. But I'd be honored to finish what we started." Without the music, they created their own rhythm, moving slowly across the packed earth beneath the oak's spreading branches. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear desert sky, and Fiona felt a curious lightness in her chest, a sensation of freedom she hadn't experienced since arriving in Dry Creek. "I should get you home," Preston said eventually. "Your aunt will be worried." "Aunt Martha is visiting friends in Tucson until next week," Fiona replied. "But you're right, it's getting late." He offered his arm again, and they walked in comfortable silence through the quiet streets. When they reached the small house Fiona shared with her aunt, Preston removed his hat as they stopped at the gate. "Thank you for the most memorable dance of my life, Miss Whitaker." "Fiona," she said. "And thank you for reminding me that sometimes standing your ground is better than seeking approval." Preston nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I ride back to Triple Diamond tomorrow, but I'll be in town again next Saturday for supplies. Perhaps you might join me for coffee at the hotel restaurant. Less controversial than dancing, I hope." Fiona felt a smile spread across her face. "I'd like that very much." As Preston Blackwell walked away into the night, Fiona stood at her gate longer than necessary, watching his tall figure disappear around the corner. Something had shifted in her world tonight, something that felt remarkably like hope. The following week passed with excruciating slowness for Fiona. Every bell jingle at the shop door made her heart leap, though she knew Preston wouldn't arrive until Saturday. The incident at the dance hall had made her both notorious and something of a curiosity in town. Some women crossed the street to avoid her, while others stopped by the shop with transparent excuses, hoping to extract details about her scandalous street dance with the Triple Diamond foreman. By Friday, Fiona had fielded so many questions about Preston Blackwell that she'd begun to wonder if she had imagined their connection. Perhaps his intervention had been merely a gentleman's response to injustice, nothing more. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm. Fiona opened the shop early, hoping to complete her pressing orders before noon. She had just finished mending Sheriff Tanner's coat, a job she'd approached with less than her usual enthusiasm when the bell above the door chimed. "Good morning, Miss Whitaker." Preston Blackwell stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking far more uncertain than he had during their dance. His dark hair was still damp from washing, and he'd exchanged his work clothes for a clean shirt and his least worn denim trousers. "Mr. Blackwell," she responded, pleasure warming her voice. "You're earlier than expected. We finished the fence repair ahead of schedule," he explained. "I was hoping our coffee arrangement still stands, though I'm earlier than proper calling hours." "Propriety seems to be a shifting standard in Dry Creek," Fiona observed with a small smile. "Let me lock up and I'll join you." As they walked toward the hotel restaurant, Fiona was acutely aware of the glances they received. Preston seemed unbothered, maintaining an appropriate distance between them while pointing out recent changes to the town, a new awning at the general store, repairs to the stagecoach office steps. The hotel restaurant was nearly empty, the lunch crowd not yet arrived. They chose a table near the window, and Preston pulled out Fiona's chair with natural courtesy that spoke of good upbringing rather than affected manners. "I've been wondering," Fiona said after they'd ordered coffee, "how a man with your obvious education became a ranch foreman." Preston's eyebrows rose slightly. "What makes you think I'm educated? Your speech, for one thing. You don't drop your endings or use the colorful language I've heard from most cowboys, and you quote Shakespeare when you think no one is listening." A genuine laugh escaped him. "You caught that, did you? It was just once while waiting for supplies at Morgenstern's. The quality of mercy is not strained," Fiona quoted. "Hardly typical cowboy philosophy." "My father was a professor of literature in Boston," Preston admitted. He believed education was essential, even perhaps especially for those headed west. His expression grew more reserved. He passed away 5 years ago. My mother followed within the year. I'm sorry, Fiona said softly. I lost my father recently as well. Is that what brought you to Dry Creek? Fiona nodded. Father was a physician, but not a practical man with money. After his death, I discovered he'd been living well beyond his means for years. The house, his equipment, everything had to be sold to cover his debts. She traced the rim of her coffee cup. Aunt Martha was my only remaining family, so here I am. Do you miss your home? Sometimes, Fiona admitted, but it wasn't the place so much as the life. In Philadelphia, I assisted my father in his practice. I had purpose, respect. Here, she shrugged, I'm just the spinster niece who sews. Is that how you see yourself? Preston asked, surprise evident in his voice. It's how the town sees me. Not everyone, he said quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Fiona felt that same curious lightness in her chest. Before she could respond, the restaurant door opened, admitting Alexander Reynolds and 2 other well-dressed men. Reynolds spotted them immediately and approached their table with confident strides. Miss Whitaker, Mr. Blackwell, what a pleasant surprise. Preston stood, his posture stiffening slightly. Mr. Reynolds. I wanted to apologize again for the misunderstanding at the dance, Reynolds said, addressing Fiona. Elizabeth Holloway can be overzealous in her guardianship of town morals. It's forgotten, Fiona replied politely. Excellent, Reynolds smiled. In fact, I'm hosting a small gathering at my home next Friday evening. Nothing formal, just a few friends enjoying music and conversation. I'd be honored if you would attend. His gaze shifted to Preston. Both of you, of course. The invitation caught Fiona off guard. Alexander Reynolds' social circle consisted of mine owners, bankers, and the occasional visiting dignitary, not seamstresses and cowboys. That's very kind, she began carefully. But we'd be delighted, Preston interjected smoothly. Wouldn't we, Miss Whitaker? Fiona read the challenge in his eyes and found herself nodding. Yes, thank you for the invitation. Reynolds seemed pleased. Wonderful. 8 o'clock next Friday. Now I'll leave you to your coffee. With a slight bow, he rejoined his companions at a table across the room. Why did you accept? Fiona asked in a low voice once Preston had resumed his seat. Because he didn't expect me to, Preston replied simply. And because sometimes the only way to change how people see you is to step into places they don't expect you to go. Fiona studied him, seeing beyond the quiet composure to the intelligence behind his eyes. You're a surprising man, Preston Blackwell. I hope that's not a complaint, he said with a half smile. Not at all, she assured him. Though I'm now faced with the dilemma of what to wear to a gathering at the Reynolds mansion. Preston's smile broadened. I have confidence in your abilities as a seamstress. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics: Fiona's childhood in Philadelphia, Preston's 3 years with the Triple Diamond, and their shared love of books. 2 hours passed before either noticed the time. I've kept you far too long, Preston said apologetically, reaching for the bill. I enjoyed every minute, Fiona replied honestly. Outside the hotel, Preston hesitated. I need to return to the ranch, but I'll be back next weekend for the Reynolds gathering. May I call on you before then? I'd like that very much, Fiona said. Perhaps Wednesday afternoon. The shop closes early. Wednesday it is, he confirmed. Then with a tip of his hat, he turned toward the livery where his horse waited. Fiona watched him go, aware that several townspeople had witnessed their long coffee and friendly parting. For once, she found she didn't care what they might say. Something was beginning between her and Preston Blackwell, something worth whatever gossip might follow. When Wednesday arrived, Fiona closed the shop promptly at 4, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the sign in the window. She had spent the previous evening altering a green dress she'd rarely worn, adding new lace at the collar and adjusting the fit. Now, changed and ready, she waited in the small sitting room that doubled as Aunt Martha's parlor when receiving guests. At precisely 4:30, a knock sounded at the door. Fiona opened it to find Preston standing on the porch, hat in hand and a small package tucked under his arm. You look lovely, he said, his admiring gaze taking in her dress. Thank you, she replied, gesturing him inside. Please come in, Preston entered, glancing around the modest parlor with its simple furnishings and the bookshelf that held Aunt Martha's modest library. "Your aunt has a fine collection," he noted, examining the titles. "They were my uncle's before he passed," Fiona explained. "Aunt Martha keeps them for sentimental reasons, though she rarely reads anything beyond the Bible and ladies' magazines." Preston nodded, then held out the package he'd brought. "This is for you. A small token." Surprised, Fiona accepted the parcel and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a book, a collection of poetry by Robert Browning. "I remembered you mentioned he was a favorite," Preston said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "My father always said books make the best gifts because they contain entire worlds." "It's perfect," Fiona said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." She ran her fingers over the embossed cover. "Would you like some tea? I have a fresh pot brewing." They settled into the parlor chairs, and Fiona served tea from her aunt's second-best china. The initial formality between them gradually eased as they talked, and Fiona found herself sharing stories. She'd nearly forgotten her first attempt at sewing that ended with a dress for her doll that had 2 left arms, her father teaching her to identify medicinal herbs in their garden. Preston, in turn, spoke of his 2 older brothers, one a lawyer in Chicago, the other a ship's captain currently somewhere in the Pacific. "I was the youngest," he explained, "the one my father thought would follow in his academic footsteps. And instead you came west," Fiona observed. "After they died, the family home felt." He searched for the right word, confining. "All those books, all those memories. I needed open space and honest work." A wry smile touched his lips. "Though I doubt my father ever imagined his Shakespeare lessons would be employed around campfires with cowboys." "Do they appreciate your recitations?" Fiona asked, amused by the image. "More than you might think. Long nights on the range, good stories are valuable currency." His expression grew thoughtful. Men are more complex than the simple categories society assigns them. Cowboys, miners, shopkeepers, behind every occupation is a person with dreams and fears and memories. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, and hopes for the future. When the mantel clock chimed 6, Preston looked up in surprise. "I've stayed far too long," he said, setting down his teacup. "Forgive me for imposing on your evening." "There's nothing to forgive," Fiona assured him. "I've enjoyed your company immensely." At the door, Preston turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "Fiona, about Friday night at Reynolds' house, having second thoughts?" she asked. "No," he replied firmly, "but you should know theirs. History between Reynolds and me. Nothing dramatic, but we see the territory's future differently." "What do you mean?" Preston hesitated. "Alexander Reynolds believes progress means Eastern investors, railroads, and pushing small ranchers and farmers aside. The Triple Diamond's owner, Mr. Harrington, stands for a different approach, one where local people have a say in how the land develops." He met her eyes directly. "I just wanted you to understand why there might be tension." Fiona appreciated his honesty. "Thank you for telling me." "I'll be prepared." After Preston left, Fiona remained by the window, watching his tall figure stride down the street toward the livery. She opened the book of poetry he'd given her, finding a passage he'd marked lightly in pencil. "The years at the spring, and days at the morn, mornings at 7, the hillsides dew-pearled, the larks on the wing, the snails on the thorn, God's in his heaven, all's right with the world." The sentiment matched her own optimism as she prepared for Friday evening, unaware of the challenges that awaited. Friday evening found Fiona standing before her small mirror, critically assessing her appearance. The dress she'd created was her finest work, a deep burgundy satin that her aunt had purchased in Tucson and saved for a special occasion. Fiona had adapted a pattern from a ladies' magazine, modifying it to suit her slender frame while maintaining the fashionable silhouette. Aunt Martha, who had returned from her trip 2 days earlier, entered the bedroom and smiled approvingly. "You look beautiful, my dear, though I still don't understand why Alexander Reynolds would invite you to his home." "He's trying to make amends for the dance hall incident," Fiona explained, adjusting a pin in her hair. "And this cowboy, this Mr. Blackwell, he'll be meeting you there. Yes, Aunt Martha, and he's a ranch foreman, not just a cowboy. Her aunt made a non-committal sound. Well, it's not my place to question Providence when it opens doors. A connection with the Reynolds family could mean security for your future. Fiona turned from the mirror. I'm not pursuing Mr. Reynolds, Aunt. He's merely our host tonight. Of course, dear, Martha replied, though her tone suggested she thought Fiona naive. But a young woman in your position should consider all possibilities. Mr. Reynolds is unmarried, wealthy, and has shown interest in you. He's shown courtesy, not interest, Fiona corrected. And I'm perfectly content with my current friendships. Martha's eyebrows rose at her emphasis on the last word, but she said nothing further as she helped Fiona with her shawl. Outside, the sound of horse hooves announced Preston's arrival with the rented buggy he'd arranged to transport them to the Reynolds estate on the outskirts of town. Preston cut an impressive figure in his dark suit, not new, but well-tailored and clearly reserved for special occasions. His appreciative gaze as Fiona descended the porch steps sent warmth spreading through her despite the evening chill. "Miss Whitaker," he said, offering his hand to help her into the buggy. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you," she replied, settling her skirts. "You're quite handsome yourself, Mr. Blackwell." After exchanging pleasantries with Aunt Martha and assuring her they would return at a reasonable hour, Preston guided the horse toward the north road that led to Reynolds' mansion, the most substantial residence in the Dry Creek area, built with profits from his 3 productive silver mines. "Nervous?" Preston asked as they left the town behind. "A little," Fiona admitted. "I've never been to an event like this. Just remember, these people put their trousers on one leg at a time, same as everyone else." His smile was reassuring. "Besides, you'll be the most beautiful woman there." The compliment, delivered with such honest warmth, eased her anxiety. As they approached the Reynolds estate, however, Fiona's confidence wavered again. The mansion rose impressively against the darkening sky, its windows ablaze with light. Several carriages were already parked in the circular drive, some far more elegant than their rented buggy. A uniformed servant greeted them at the entrance, directing Preston to leave the buggy with the stable hands before escorting them inside. The foyer opened into a grand hall decorated with imported furnishings and artwork that must have cost a fortune to transport to the territory. Alexander Reynolds appeared, resplendent in an evening suit that had clearly come from an Eastern tailor. "Miss Whitaker, Mr. Blackwell," he greeted them warmly. "I'm delighted you could join us." He led them into the main salon where about 20 guests were gathered, engaged in conversation as a hired pianist played softly in the corner. Fiona recognized some of Dry Creek's prominent citizens, the banker and his wife, the town doctor, the owner of the largest mercantile. To her surprise, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway were also present, though Elizabeth Holloway's tight smile upon seeing Fiona suggested the invitation had been extended out of obligation rather than desire. "Allow me to introduce you," Reynolds said, guiding them through the room. Most guests were politely welcoming, though Fiona noticed several appraising glances at her dress, clearly homemade, despite its quality, and curious looks at Preston, whose presence in such company was unexpected. Through it all, Preston remained at her side, his quiet confidence providing an anchor in the unfamiliar social waters. During a moment when Reynolds was called away to greet new arrivals, Mr. Holloway approached them with forced joviality. "Blackwell, didn't expect to see you here. Thought you triple-diamond men preferred saloons to parlors." "We appreciate refinement when we find it, Mr. Holloway," Preston replied evenly, Miss Whitaker's company being the finest example. Mrs. Holloway, who had joined her husband, gave Fiona a cold look. "That's a lovely dress, Miss Whitaker. Did you make it yourself?" "I did," Fiona acknowledged, hearing the subtle condescension in the woman's tone. "How resourceful," Mrs. Holloway remarked. "One must make do with one's circumstances, I suppose." Before Fiona could respond, Preston smoothly interjected, "Indeed, Mrs. Holloway. And when those circumstances include exceptional talent with needle and thread, the results rival anything from New York's finest shops." His pointed compliment left Mrs. Holloway momentarily speechless, and Fiona felt a rush of gratitude for his defense. The evening progressed with dinner served in Reynolds' formal dining room, where Fiona found herself seated between Preston and an elderly gentleman who owned one of the territory's first cattle ranches. The conversation flowed around topics of Eastern politics, the territory's bid for statehood, and the declining silver market. "The future is in cattle," the old rancher declared. "Or it would be if these new regulations weren't choking the industry." "The regulations ensure fair access to water rights for all settlers," Preston countered respectfully. "Without them, small ranchers would be driven out by larger operations. Progress requires consolidation," Reynolds commented from the head of the table. "Small operations are inefficient and ultimately unsustainable. The same principle applies to mining, ranching, even commerce." "Efficiency isn't the only measure of value," Preston replied. "Communities need diverse businesses and landowners to thrive." Reynolds smiled thinly. "A romantic notion, but economics tells a different story." The tension between the two men was subtle but unmistakable. Fiona, sensing the conversation heading toward dangerous territory, deftly changed the subject by asking about the painting hanging in the dining room, a landscape of the nearby mountains that captured Reynolds' attention, and pried as he explained it had been commissioned from a renowned Eastern artist. After dinner, the guests returned to the salon where the pianist had been joined by a violinist. Several couples began dancing in the cleared center of the room. "Would you honor me with a dance, Miss Whitaker?" Reynolds asked, appearing at her elbow. Fiona glanced at Preston, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she said, accepting his offered hand. Reynolds was an accomplished dancer, guiding her smoothly across the floor. "You dance beautifully," he commented. "Though I suppose I witnessed that already, albeit in unusual circumstances." "Sometimes unusual circumstances reveal unexpected truths," Fiona replied. "Indeed." Reynolds studied her with interest. "You're not like most young women in Dry Creek, Miss Whitaker. You have a certain independence of spirit that's quite refreshing." "My father encouraged me to think for myself," she said. "It wasn't always appreciated in Philadelphia either." Reynolds laughed. "I can imagine. Tell me, are you content with life as a seamstress?" "It seems a limited outlet for someone of your obvious intelligence." "I take pride in my work," Fiona replied carefully. "Of course, but surely you aspire to more." His voice dropped slightly. "Dry Creek is changing, Miss Whitaker. When the railroad spur is completed next year, this territory will transform. Those positioned advantageously will prosper significantly." Fiona sensed he was leading toward something specific. "And how does one position oneself advantageously, Mr. Reynolds?" "Through connections, primarily. The right associations open doors that remain closed to others." His hand at her waist pressed slightly more firmly. "I could be such a connection if you were interested." The implication was clear, and Fiona felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "That's very kind, Mr. Reynolds, but I'm satisfied with my current path." Something hardened in his expression before his social mask slipped back into place. "Of course, though I hope you'll consider that your friendship with Blackwell may limit your opportunities in certain circles." "The circles I value most are those where character matters more than station," Fiona replied, relieved as the music ended. Reynolds escorted her back to where Preston stood, watching them with carefully neutral expression. "Your partner returned safely," Reynolds said with a slight bow. "Though I hope you'll save another dance for me later, Miss Whitaker." As he walked away, Preston leaned closer to Fiona. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said, though her smile felt strained. "Just discovering that our host's invitation may have had ulterior motives." Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. Ah, Reynolds is accustomed to acquiring whatever catches his interest, land, mines, or people. "I'm not a silver claim to be staked," Fiona said with quiet heat. Preston's expression softened. "No, you're far more valuable." He hesitated, then offered his hand. "Would you care to dance? I promise the floor is smoother than the street outside Holloway's." The tension eased from Fiona's shoulders as she placed her hand in his. "I'd like that very much." As Preston led her in the waltz, Fiona was acutely aware of Reynolds watching them from across the room, his expression unreadable. She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the man before her, whose eyes held nothing but warmth and admiration. Later, as they prepared to depart, Reynolds intercepted them near the door. "Leaving so soon? The night is still young." "I promised Miss Whitaker's aunt we'd return at a reasonable hour," Preston explained. "Of course, propriety must be maintained." Reynolds smiled at Fiona. "I've enjoyed your company immensely, Miss Whitaker. I hope you'll consider my offer of friendship." "You have a lovely home, Mr. Reynolds," Fiona replied diplomatically. "Thank you for your hospitality." Outside, as Preston helped her into the buggy, Fiona released a long breath. "That was more complicated than I anticipated. Reynolds doesn't take rejection well," Preston observed as he took his seat beside her. "He's not used to hearing no." "I gathered that impression." Fiona adjusted her shawl against the night air. "He seems to view people as commodities to be acquired." "Not all people," Preston corrected. "Just those he believes might be useful or decorative." He glanced at her. "You're both, which makes you particularly interesting to him." "Well, his interest is unwelcome," Fiona stated firmly. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the stars brilliantly clear above the desert landscape. Fiona found herself studying Preston's profile, strong and steady in the moonlight. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For seeing me as a person, not a possession or a project." Her voice softened. "For dancing with me in the dust when others wouldn't let me through their doors." Preston's hand found hers in the darkness of the buggy. "Thank you for being brave enough to dance when others expected you to slink away in shame." Their fingers intertwined, and in that simple touch, Fiona felt a connection deeper than any she'd known before. As they approached the town, however, Preston reluctantly released her hand. "Your aunt will be waiting," he said as they stopped before her house. "Yes," Fiona agreed, though she was reluctant for the evening to end. Preston helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "May I call on you again tomorrow?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied honestly. In the soft glow of the porch lantern, Preston's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heartbeat, Fiona thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, ever the gentleman. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, his voice carrying a depth of feeling that needed no further expression. Fiona watched him drive away, her heart beating a rhythm that felt new and familiar all at once. Inside, Aunt Martha waited with eager questions about the evening, but Fiona found herself providing only the simplest answers, unwilling to share the precious moments that now belonged solely to her and Preston. Over the next several weeks, Preston called on Fiona regularly, their relationship deepening with each meeting. They discovered shared interests beyond literature, a love of music, a dry sense of humor, and a common vision of the territory's future as a place where hard work and integrity mattered more than wealth or connections. One Sunday afternoon in late April, they rode in Preston's buggy to a small creek outside town where cottonwoods provided shade from the intensifying spring sun. Fiona had packed a picnic lunch, and Preston brought along a volume of Whitman's poetry. "My father would have considered Whitman scandalously modern," Preston commented as they spread a blanket beneath the largest cottonwood. "But there's something about his celebration of America that speaks to me." "Read some," Fiona requested, arranging the food she'd brought: fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. Preston opened the book to a marked page and began reading Song of the Open Road in his rich baritone. The words drifted around them, merging with the sounds of the creek and the rustling leaves overhead. Fiona watched him as he read, noting how his expression changed with the rhythm of the verses, how his hands, strong and capable, held the book with gentle reverence. When he finished, they ate in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the simple pleasure of good food in beautiful surroundings. "I've been offered a position," Preston said eventually, his tone carefully neutral. "The owner of the Broken Spoke Ranch near Tucson is looking for someone to manage his operation. His health is failing, and his son has no interest in ranching." Fiona set down her glass, trying to mask her dismay. "Tucson is quite far, 120 miles, Preston confirmed. It's a significant opportunity. The ranch is larger than Triple Diamond, and the position comes with a partnership agreement. Eventually, I could own a share. It sounds perfect for you, Fiona said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice despite the hollow feeling spreading in her chest. When would you leave? That's the thing, Preston said, shifting to face her directly. I haven't accepted yet. I told Mr. Harrington I needed time to consider. Why, it's clearly a wonderful opportunity. Preston reached for her hand, his expression serious. Because the most important consideration in my decision isn't the size of the ranch or the partnership agreement. He paused, gathering his thoughts. It's whether you would consider coming with me as my wife. The world seemed to still around them. Fiona stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What did you say? I'm asking if you'll marry me, Fiona. His voice was steady, though she could see nervousness in his eyes. I love you. I think I've loved you since that night we danced in the street. I know this is sudden. It's not, Fiona interrupted, joy bubbling up inside her. Not to me. Then you'll consider it. I don't need to consider it. She squeezed his hand. Yes, Preston, yes, I'll marry you. His face transformed with a smile of such pure happiness that it took her breath away. Then he was drawing her into his arms, his lips finding hers in their first kiss, gentle at first, then deepening with all the emotion they'd been holding back. When they finally parted, Preston pressed his forehead to hers. I don't have a ring yet, he admitted. This wasn't how I planned to ask. I had thought to speak with your aunt first, to do everything properly. Fiona laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. There's nothing improper about two people finding each other against all expectations. We'll need to marry quickly if we're to take the Tucson position, Preston said. They need someone by the end of May. I don't need a grand wedding, Fiona assured him. Just you and perhaps a few friends to witness. Preston kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. 2 weeks. That should give us time to arrange everything and prepare for the journey. 2 weeks, Fiona agreed, feeling as though her heart might overflow with happiness. Their return to town was delayed by frequent stops for kisses and whispered plans for their future. By the time Preston delivered Fiona to her aunt's house, the sun was setting, painting the desert in gold and crimson. I'll speak with your aunt tomorrow, Preston promised as they stood on the porch, and we'll announce our engagement properly. She'll be surprised, Fiona warned. She still harbors hopes that Mr. Reynolds might show serious interest. Preston's expression darkened slightly. Reynolds has other concerns at the moment. Word is the silver vein in his main mine is running out, and he's overextended on the railroad investment. That would explain why he's been absent from town recently, Fiona mused. Not that I'm complaining. With a final kiss, they parted, both floating on the happiness of their new engagement. Neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street, a figure whose plans were being unexpectedly disrupted by their joy. The following morning, Preston arrived at the seamstress shop shortly after it opened. Aunt Martha was arranging fabric in the front window while Fiona assisted a customer with selecting buttons for a shirt. When the customer departed, Preston approached the counter, hat in hand and determination in his posture. Good morning, Miss Whitaker, Mrs. Winslow. I was hoping I might have a word with both of you. Martha's eyebrows rose, but she gestured toward the small office at the back of the shop. Of course, Mr. Blackwell, we can speak privately back here. Once the three were seated, Preston cleared his throat. Mrs. Winslow, I've come to ask for your blessing on a matter of great importance to me and I hope to your niece as well. Martha glanced between them, comprehension dawning. I see. I love Fiona, Preston stated simply. I've asked her to become my wife and she has agreed. But we would both value your blessing on our marriage. A tense silence followed his declaration. Martha's lips pressed into a thin line as she absorbed the news. This is very sudden, she finally said. You've known each other, what, 2 months? Sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind might take years to discover, Preston replied. Martha turned to Fiona. And you're certain of this decision? I've never been more certain of anything, Fiona answered firmly, her aunt sighed. You're both adults, capable of making your own choices. I cannot say I'm not concerned about the hasty nature of this engagement, but… She paused, studying Preston with shrewd eyes. You seem an honorable man, Mr. Blackwell. Will you provide for my niece properly? I've accepted a position managing the Broken Spoke Ranch near Tucson, Preston explained. It comes with a good house, excellent compensation, and eventually, partnership in the operation. Tucson, Martha exclaimed, that's so far. It's a day's journey by stage, Fiona said gently. We could visit regularly. Martha was quiet for a moment, her expression softening as she regarded her niece's obvious happiness. Your parents would want your joy above all else, she finally said. If Mr. Blackwell is your choice, then you have my blessing. Relief washed over Fiona as she embraced her aunt. Thank you. When do you plan this wedding? Martha asked, practical concerns already surfacing. 2 weeks from Saturday, Preston replied. I realize it's soon, but the position in Tucson requires us to be there by the end of May. 2 weeks. Martha looked scandalized. There's so much to prepare. It will be a simple ceremony, Fiona assured her. Just close friends and family. Martha shook her head, but there was resignation in her smile. Nothing is ever simple when it comes to weddings, my dear, but we'll manage somehow. With Martha's blessing secured, Preston and Fiona made their engagement official, placing a notice in the weekly newspaper and informing their friends. The reaction in town was mixed. Some offered genuine congratulations, while others expressed thinly veiled surprise that Fiona had secured such a match, or that Preston was settling down at all. The preparations consumed Fiona's days. Between continuing her work at the shop and sewing her own wedding dress, she barely had time to consider the enormity of the change before her. Each evening, Preston would visit briefly, bringing updates on his arrangements with the Broken Spoke and sharing her excitement about their future. 10 days before the wedding, as Fiona was closing the shop, the door opened to admit Alexander Reynolds. She hadn't seen him since the night of his party, and she noted with surprise that he looked less polished than usual. His normally immaculate suit showed signs of wear, and a certain tension lined his face. Mr. Reynolds, she greeted him cautiously. How may I help you? I've come to offer my congratulations, he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Your engagement is the talk of the town. Thank you, Fiona replied, busying herself with straightening spools of thread to avoid his gaze. Tucson is an ambitious move, Reynolds continued, casually examining a bolt of fabric. I understand Blackwell has secured quite an opportunity there. Yes, he'll be managing the Broken Spoke Ranch. Ah, old man Mitchell's place, Reynolds nodded. Interesting timing. I wasn't aware he was looking for new management. Something in his tone made Fiona glance up sharply. What do you mean? Nothing of consequence. Reynolds waved dismissively. Business arrangements evolve constantly out here. One day a man thinks he has a secure position, the next. He let the thought hang unfinished. If you have something to say, Mr. Reynolds, please speak plainly, Fiona said, her patience wearing thin. Reynolds approached the counter, his expression turning serious. I admire direct speech, Miss Whitaker. Very well, I believe you're making a mistake. Blackwell is a capable foreman, but his prospects are limited. The Broken Spoke may seem like an opportunity now, but Mitchell is notoriously fickle. He's hired and dismissed 3 managers in the past 2 years. Preston is different, Fiona stated firmly. He understands ranching better than most men twice his age. Perhaps, Reynolds conceded. But understanding cattle won't protect him from changing fortunes. The territory is transforming, Miss Whitaker. The days of independent ranchers are numbered. Railroad companies, Eastern investors, they're the future. Is there a purpose to this conversation beyond undermining my confidence in my fiancé? Reynolds seemed taken aback by her directness, then smiled with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. You're extraordinary, you know. Most women would have withered under the scandal of that dance hall incident, yet you emerged stronger. He leaned forward slightly. My offer still stands, Fiona. Not as an employer or benefactor, but as a man who recognizes your value. Marry me instead. The proposal was so unexpected that Fiona could only stare at him in shock. I can provide security that Blackwell never could, Reynolds continued. My business interests extend beyond Dry Creek. Even if the mines falter, my investments will endure. You would never want for anything. Finding her voice, Fiona replied coldly, except love. Reynolds straightened, his expression hardening. Love is a luxury, Miss Whitaker. Security is a necessity. Not to me, Fiona said. I appreciate your offer, Mr. Reynolds, but my decision is made. I love Preston and I'm going to marry him. Consider carefully, Reynolds warned. Decisions made in haste often lead to lasting regret. The only regret would be compromising my heart for material comfort, Fiona replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to lock up. Reynolds studied her for a moment longer, then nodded curtly. As you wish. When your cowboy's dreams crumble, remember I warned you. After he left, Fiona leaned against the counter, her hands trembling slightly. Reynolds' words, though clearly motivated by his own interests, had planted a seed of worry. Was the broken-spoke opportunity as solid as Preston believed? Could their future together be more precarious than they realized? She pushed the doubts aside. Preston was honest and hard-working qualities that would serve him well regardless of the challenges ahead. Their love was worth any uncertainty the future might hold. That evening, when Preston arrived for his usual visit, Fiona debated whether to mention Reynolds' proposal. She decided against it, not wanting to create unnecessary tension before their wedding. Instead, they discussed final arrangements for the ceremony and their subsequent journey to Tucson. As the wedding day approached, however, Reynolds' warning about the broken spoke lingered in Fiona's mind. 5 days before the ceremony, while finishing her wedding dress in the quiet shop, she made a decision. Knowledge was better than uncertainty. She would write to the broken spoke's owner, Mr. Mitchell, confirming the position and their expected arrival. 2 days later, she received a response that chilled her to the core. Miss Whitaker, I regret to inform you that no position exists for Mr. Blackwell at the Broken Spoke Ranch. While we did discuss terms some weeks ago, I have since made other arrangements. I wish you both well in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Harold Mitchell. Fiona read the letter 3 times, disbelief turning to confusion, then anger. Had Preston lied to her? No, that was impossible. The man she knew would never fabricate such an elaborate deception. When Preston arrived that evening, Fiona met him at the door with the letter in hand. What does this mean? She asked without preamble. Preston's confusion appeared genuine as he read Mitchell's words. The color drained from his face. This can't be right. I have a signed agreement. He reached into his coat pocket, producing a folded document. Mitchell and I finalized everything 2 weeks ago. Fiona took the agreement, noting the clear terms and Mitchell's distinctive signature. Then why would he write this? Preston's expression darkened as understanding dawned. Reynolds. What would he have to do with this? Everything. Preston's voice was tight with controlled anger. Reynolds has been buying land all around the Broken Spoke. Mitchell's water rights are crucial to Reynolds' plans for redirecting the stream that feeds the eastern grazing lands. You think he pressured Mitchell to renege on your agreement? I'd bet my life on it, Preston confirmed grimly. Reynolds wants the Broken Spoke weakened so Mitchell will be forced to sell. A strong manager would interfere with those plans. Fiona remembered Reynolds' unexpected proposal and his warning about Mitchell's fickleness. He came to the shop a few days ago, she admitted. He asked me to marry him instead. Preston stiffened. What? I refused him, of course. Fiona touched Preston's arm reassuringly. But he warned me that the Broken Spoke position wasn't secure. I thought he was just being spiteful. He was laying groundwork, Preston said bitterly, making sure you'd blame me when the position disappeared. Fiona led him to the parlor sofa where they sat close together, the Mitchell letter between them. What do we do now? She asked. We still get married, Preston said firmly. Unless you've changed your mind. Never, Fiona replied without hesitation, but without the Broken Spoke position. I have savings, Preston assured her. And Mr. Harrington hasn't filled my position at Triple Diamond yet. We may need to postpone Tucson, but our future together remains unchanged. Relief flooded through Fiona. I was worried you might think I'd be disappointed that without the partnership opportunity I might reconsider. Preston took her hands in his. Fiona, I proposed because I love you, not because I wanted to impress you with a management position. If we have to start smaller than we hoped, so be it. We'll build our future together, whatever it looks like. The certainty in his voice dissolved the last of her fears. Then Reynolds has failed. He wanted to separate us, and he's only brought us closer. Reynolds doesn't understand what truly matters, Preston said, drawing her closer. He thinks everything and everyone has a price, but some things can't be bought or manipulated like what we share. Their kiss sealed this truth between them, a promise stronger than any written agreement. When they finally parted, both were smiling despite the challenge before them. I should speak with Mr. Harrington tomorrow, Preston said. If my position is still available, we can stay in Dry Creek until another opportunity arises. Wherever we are, we'll be together, Fiona replied. That's what matters most. The following day, Preston rode out to the Triple Diamond to speak with his employer. Fiona continued wedding preparations, though with a more modest outlook now that their immediate future had changed. She was examining alterations to her aunt's parlor to accommodate the wedding guests when a knock sounded at the front door. Opening it, she found Sheriff Tanner on the porch, his expression unusually grave. Miss Whitaker, I need to speak with Mr. Blackwell. Is he here? No, he's at the Triple Diamond today, Fiona replied, sudden anxiety gripping her. Is something wrong? There's been a complaint filed, Tanner said, shifting uncomfortably. Alexander Reynolds is accusing Blackwell of forging documents related to the Broken Spoke Ranch. Says he has evidence Blackwell attempted to defraud Mr. Mitchell. Fiona's hand flew to her mouth. That's absurd. Preston has a signed agreement. I've seen it myself. Reynolds claims the signature was forged, Tanner explained. He's demanding Blackwell's arrest when he returns to town. This is outrageous, Fiona declared, anger replacing shock. It's nothing but revenge because I refused Reynolds' proposal. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. Reynolds proposed marriage to you. Yes, and I declined. Now he's trying to destroy my future with Preston. Fiona gathered her shawl. I need to warn Preston. Miss Whitaker, Tanner said hesitantly, I don't have any personal stake in this matter. Reynolds is influential, but if what you're saying is true, perhaps there's more to investigate before taking action. Fiona paused, studying the sheriff's conflicted expression. Are you saying you won't arrest Preston immediately? I'm saying I need to see this allegedly forged document myself, Tanner replied carefully, and perhaps speak with Mr. Mitchell directly. Thank you, Sheriff, Fiona said sincerely. Preston should return by sundown. We'll come to your office together. After Tanner left, Fiona paced the parlor, fear and anger warring within her. Reynolds' vindictiveness had escalated beyond what she'd imagined possible. A forgery accusation was serious. It could result in prison if proven, and would certainly destroy Preston's reputation even if disproven. Unable to wait passively, Fiona made a decision. She quickly changed into her riding clothes, borrowed her aunt's horse, and set out for the Triple Diamond. The ranch lay 15 miles outside town, and though Fiona was not an accomplished rider, determination drove her forward. The journey took longer than she'd anticipated, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly as she followed the well-traveled road. When she finally arrived at the ranch, she was dusty, tired, and desperately worried. A ranch hand directed her to the main house, where she found Preston in conversation with Jacob Harrington, the Triple Diamond's owner. Both men looked up in surprise as she entered. Fiona. Preston rose immediately, concern evident on his face. What's happened? Quickly, she explained Reynolds' accusation and the sheriff's visit. As she spoke, Preston's expression hardened while Harrington listened with growing anger. This is beyond the pale, Harrington declared when she finished. Reynolds has always played rough in business matters, but falsely accusing a man of forgery is criminal in itself. I need to return to town immediately, Preston said, already gathering his hat. If Reynolds has filed formal charges, you'll need more than denials, Harrington interrupted. You'll need Mitchell himself to refute this nonsense. Tucson is a 2-day ride, Preston pointed out. By the time I could bring Mitchell back, my reputation would be in tatters. Harrington stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. Not necessarily. Mitchell's brother, Theodore, lives just 30 miles south of here. He might have correspondence from Harold that could verify the authenticity of your agreement. It's worth trying, Fiona agreed eagerly. I'll go tonight, Preston decided. If I can reach Theodore Mitchell by morning and return tomorrow night, we might prevent this from escalating further. You can take my fastest horse, Harrington offered. And I'll accompany Miss Whitaker back to town. Between us, we'll keep Reynolds at bay until you return." Preston turned to Fiona, his expression softening with concern. "You shouldn't have made this journey alone. It was dangerous." "Less dangerous than letting Reynolds destroy our future without a fight," she replied firmly. His smile was tinged with pride as he took her hands. "We'll face him together. Return with Mr. Harrington, explain to the sheriff that I'm gathering evidence and ask him to wait until tomorrow evening before taking any action. And if he won't wait, tell him I'll return regardless," Preston said grimly. "I'm not running from false accusations." As they prepared to part ways Preston southward to find Theodore Mitchell, Fiona and Harrington back to Dry Creek, a sense of foreboding settled over Fiona. Reynolds had proven himself more dangerous than she'd anticipated, willing to use his influence to destroy a man simply for standing in his way. The return journey with Harrington was faster, but no less tense. As they rode, the older man shared his own history with Alexander Reynolds, a long-standing feud over water rights that had nearly bankrupted Harrington before his son discovered a new water source on their property. "Reynolds doesn't forget perceived slights," Harrington warned, "and he particularly resents those who succeed despite his interference." "Like you," Fiona observed. "And now, like you and Preston," Harrington agreed. "Your defiance at the dance hall became the talk of the county." Reynolds isn't accustomed to public challenges, especially from those he considers beneath him socially. By the time they reached Dry Creek, evening was falling. They went directly to the sheriff's office, where they found Tanner reviewing documents at his desk. "Miss Whitaker," he acknowledged, then nodded respectfully to her companion. "Mr. Harrington, this is unexpected." "I understand you're investigating allegations against my foreman," Harrington said without preamble. Tanner sighed, gesturing to the papers before him. "Reynolds has filed a formal complaint. He's presented a letter from Harold Mitchell claiming Blackwell forged his signature on a management agreement." "May I see it?" Fiona asked. After a moment's hesitation, Tanner handed her the letter. The handwriting was similar to the note she'd received, but something seemed off: the signature more elaborate, the phrasing more formal. "This doesn't match the letter I received from Mr. Mitchell," Fiona declared, retrieving the earlier correspondence from her pocket. "Compare them yourself." Tanner examined both documents, his brow furrowing. "There are differences," he admitted, "because one of them is likely forged," Harrington stated firmly, "and I'd wager it's not Preston's agreement that's false." "That's a serious accusation against Mr. Reynolds," Tanner said cautiously. "No more serious than the one he's made against an honest man," Fiona countered. "Preston has gone to speak with Theodore Mitchell, Harold's brother. He'll return tomorrow with evidence of the agreement's authenticity." Tanner leaned back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the complications. "I suppose I can delay any action until tomorrow evening," he finally conceded. "But Blackwell needs to report here immediately upon his return." "He will," Fiona promised, relief washing through her. "Thank you, Sheriff." As they left the office, Harrington placed a paternal hand on Fiona's shoulder. "You should rest. Tomorrow may be challenging." "I can't rest while Preston's future, our future, hangs in the balance," Fiona replied. "Then let me offer another suggestion," Harrington said. "Reynolds doesn't know Preston has gone to Theodore Mitchell. If we can keep him believing Preston is still at Triple Diamond until tomorrow, it gives us more time to gather evidence." "How do we do that?" "I'll return to the ranch tonight and ensure everyone there understands they're to say nothing about Preston's whereabouts," Harrington explained. "Meanwhile, you should continue your wedding preparations as if nothing is amiss. The more normal everything appears, the less likely Reynolds is to suspect we're building a defense." The strategy made sense, though it required Fiona to maintain a composure she wasn't sure she possessed. Nevertheless, she agreed, and they parted with Harrington promising to return the following afternoon. True to her word, Fiona spent the next day continuing wedding preparations, though her mind was constantly with Preston. She arranged flowers for the ceremony, finalized the simple reception menu with her aunt, and even managed to smile when neighbors stopped by to offer congratulations. By mid-afternoon, with still no word from Preston, Anxiety began to overwhelm her practiced calm. What if he couldn't find Theodore Mitchell? What if Reynolds had somehow anticipated their move and intercepted Preston on the road? These fears were multiplying when the shop door opened to admit Jacob Harrington, his expression grave. "Any news?" Fiona asked immediately. "Nothing from Preston yet," Harrington replied, "but there's a new development. Reynolds has convinced Judge Porter to issue an arrest warrant. Tanner is under pressure to execute it today. But he promised to wait until evening. The judge outranks the sheriff," Harrington said grimly. "Tanner sent a deputy to Triple Diamond this morning. When he didn't find Preston there, he became suspicious." Fiona's hand flew to her mouth. "They'll think he's fled." "Exactly. Tanner's organizing a search party now." Harrington lowered his voice. "There's more. Reynolds is spreading rumors that Preston absconded with money from the Broken Spoke, supposedly an advance payment for the management position." "That's absurd," Fiona protested. "Preston would never." "Of course not," Harrington interrupted gently. "But Reynolds is painting a convincing picture for those inclined to believe the worst." Fiona sank onto a nearby chair, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. "What can we do?" "I've sent 2 of my best men to intercept Preston on his return route," Harrington said. "If they find him, they'll bring him directly to my lawyer in Tucson rather than back to Dry Creek. From there, we can fight these false charges properly." "But that means postponing the wedding," Fiona realized, her voice small. Harrington's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm afraid so. At least until we've cleared Preston's name." Tears threatened, but Fiona blinked them back, determination replacing despair. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let Reynolds win like this. If we postpone, it suggests Preston has something to hide. Miss Whitaker, the charges are serious. If Preston returns to Dry Creek now, then we'll face them together," Fiona declared, standing. "As husband and wife." Harrington studied her with growing respect. "You're proposing to proceed with the wedding regardless?" "Yes, tomorrow as planned." Fiona began pacing, her mind racing. "If your men find Preston, tell them to bring him here openly, proudly. We'll be married, then go together to the sheriff's office. Reynolds wants to paint Preston as a fugitive. We'll show everyone he's a man of honor." "It's risky," Harrington cautioned. "If the evidence from Theodore Mitchell isn't compelling, then we'll find other evidence," Fiona insisted. "The truth is on our side, Mr. Harrington. I refuse to start our marriage in hiding." The older man's weathered face broke into a reluctant smile. "Preston is a fortunate man to have found such a partner." "Very well, Miss Whitaker. We'll proceed as you suggest." That evening, Fiona waited anxiously for news, jumping at every sound outside the house. Aunt Martha, now fully informed of the situation, alternated between practical preparations for the wedding and dire predictions about their future. "If Preston is arrested, what becomes of you?" she fretted, arranging flowers with nervous energy. "You'll be married to a man in jail or worse, one who's fled justice. He's innocent," Fiona reminded her firmly. "And I'd rather be married to an innocent man facing false charges than safe and alone because I lacked courage." Martha sighed heavily. "Your mother always said you had more spirit than sense. I see she was right." "Mother also said that love worth having is worth fighting for," Fiona countered. "I'm fighting, Aunt Martha, for Preston, for myself, for the future we deserve." As midnight approached with still no word from Preston or Harrington's men, Fiona finally retired to her room, though sleep eluded her. She lay awake, watching moonlight trace patterns on the ceiling, praying for Preston's safe return and the evidence they needed. Dawn broke with no news, and Fiona rose to begin dressing for her wedding day. The simple white gown she'd created hung ready, its delicate embroidery representing hours of hopeful work. She touched it gently, wondering if she would indeed wear it today. At 9 o'clock, with the ceremony scheduled for noon, a knock at the door sent her rushing from her room. Aunt Martha had already answered it, admitting Jacob Harrington, whose expression revealed nothing. "Mr. Harrington," Fiona greeted him anxiously. "Have you heard from your men?" "Better than that," he replied, stepping aside to reveal Preston standing behind him, dusty from the road but wonderfully, gloriously present. "Preston?" Fiona flew into his arms, propriety forgotten in her relief. He held her tightly, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." When they finally separated, Preston held up a leather portfolio. "I have letters from Theodore Mitchell confirming his brother's agreement with me, plus a telegram from Harold Mitchell himself disavowing Reynolds' claims." "That should be enough to clear your name," Harrington said confidently. "Reynolds won't give up easily," Preston warned, keeping Fiona's hand in his. "He's invested too much in destroying me." "Let him try," Fiona replied fiercely. "We're getting married today, and then we're facing him together." Preston's smile was tender as he touched her cheek. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," she whispered. "We deserve each other and whatever future we build." The wedding proceeded as planned, though with more tension than a typical ceremony might hold. The minister performed the service in Aunt Martha's parlor, with Jacob Harrington standing as witness alongside a few close friends who had refused to believe the rumors circulating about Preston. Fiona wore her white dress with pride, and Preston had somehow found time to clean his suit despite his hurried journey. They exchanged vows with clear voices and unwavering commitment, their eyes conveying promises beyond the traditional words. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Preston's kiss was brief but full of meaning, a pledge to stand together against whatever challenges awaited them outside. They had just accepted the first congratulations from their small gathering when the front door burst open. Sheriff Tanner entered, followed by 2 deputies, and Alexander Reynolds himself. "Preston Blackwell," Tanner announced formally, "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of forgery and attempted fraud." The room fell silent as Preston stepped forward, keeping Fiona's hand in his. "I'm aware of the charges, Sheriff," he said calmly. "They're false, and I have evidence to prove it." Reynolds' face hardened as he noticed their formal attire and the minister standing nearby. "You went through with the wedding?" he asked incredulously. "Despite knowing he's facing prison." "I married an innocent man," Fiona replied steadily. "And we have proof of that innocence." Preston handed the portfolio to Sheriff Tanner. "Letters from Theodore Mitchell verifying the agreement was legitimate, plus a telegram from Harold Mitchell himself confirming his signature is genuine and retracting any suggestion of forgery." Tanner examined the documents while Reynolds' face flushed with anger. "These could easily be fabricated," he protested. "Mitchell's telegram is especially suspect. It contradicts his earlier statement completely." "Perhaps because his earlier statement was the fabrication," Jacob Harrington suggested, stepping forward. Pressured from someone with significant influence over his business interests, perhaps Reynolds turned on him. "Be careful with your accusations, Harrington." "I'm merely suggesting an alternative explanation," Harrington replied mildly. "One that Sheriff Tanner might consider investigating before arresting an innocent man on his wedding day." Tanner looked uncomfortable as he finished reviewing the documents. "These do raise questions about the original complaint," he admitted reluctantly. "I think we need to clarify some matters before proceeding with an arrest." "This is absurd," Reynolds exploded. "You have a valid warrant, Sheriff. Execute it." "I also have an obligation to evaluate new evidence," Tanner countered, his backbone stiffening under Reynolds' demands. "Mr. Blackwell, I'll need you to come to my office to make a formal statement, but I won't be placing you under arrest at this time." Relief washed through Fiona, though she knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Reynolds' fury was palpable as he stared at her and Preston with naked hatred. "This isn't over," he warned before storming out. The sheriff followed more slowly, arranging for Preston to appear at his office in 1 hour. As the door closed behind them, the wedding guests exhaled collectively. "Well," Aunt Martha said with forced brightness, "I believe we have a wedding cake to cut before the groom needs to attend to legal matters." The small celebration that followed was subdued but genuine. Friends offered congratulations and support, promising to stand by the newlyweds through whatever challenges lay ahead. Preston and Fiona accepted their kindness gratefully, finding strength in the community that had refused to abandon them. Before leaving for the sheriff's office, Preston took Fiona aside. "This isn't how I imagined starting our married life," he said apologetically. Perhaps not, she agreed, straightening his tie, but we're facing it together just as we promised. Reynolds won't stop, Preston warned. Even if these charges are dismissed, he'll find other ways to come after us. Fiona met his gaze steadily. Then we'll face those too. I didn't marry you because I expected an easy life, Preston. I married you because I want a life with meaning, with love with you. His kiss was tender but brief. They had a sheriff waiting and a future to defend. Hand in hand, they walked from Aunt Martha's house toward the sheriff's office, drawing curious stares from townspeople who had heard conflicting rumors throughout the morning. At the sheriff's office, Preston gave his statement while Fiona waited outside. Jacob Harrington had gone to fetch his lawyer from the neighboring town, promising additional legal support if needed. The hour stretched to 2, then 3, as Tanner questioned Preston thoroughly about the broken spoke agreement and his interactions with Harold Mitchell. When Preston finally emerged, his expression was cautiously optimistic. Tanner is sending telegrams to verify my statement, he explained as they walked toward Aunt Martha's. He suspended the arrest warrant pending those responses. That's good news, Fiona said, relief evident in her voice. Conditional good news, Preston cautioned. Reynolds is still pressing him to act, and Tanner is caught between powerful interests. As they turned onto Fiona's street, they noticed a buggy parked outside Aunt Martha's house, an elegant vehicle with the Reynolds Mining Company logo on its side. Preston's hand tightened around Fiona's as they approached cautiously. Inside, they found Alexander Reynolds seated in the parlor, taking tea with a clearly uncomfortable Aunt Martha. He rose as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell," he said formally. "Forgive the intrusion, but I felt a personal conversation was necessary." "You've said enough today," Preston replied coldly. "On the contrary," Reynolds countered, "I've come to make an offer that might resolve our differences." Fiona exchanged a wary glance with Preston. "What kind of offer?" "A business proposition," Reynolds said, setting down his teacup. "I've invested heavily in the railroad spur coming to Dry Creek. That investment requires certain land acquisitions to secure the right-of-way, including portions of the Triple Diamond." "Harrington will never sell to you," Preston stated firmly. "Perhaps not to me directly," Reynolds conceded, "but to a neutral third party representing the railroad's interests. That might be different," understanding dawned on Fiona. "You want Preston to act as your agent." "Precisely." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Mr. Blackwell has Harrington's trust. If he were to approach about selling specific parcels with a generous offer, naturally Harrington might agree." "You want me to betray the man who stood by me when you tried to destroy me," Preston summarized, disbelief coloring his tone. "Why would I possibly consider that?" "Because in exchange, I would withdraw all charges and complaints against you," Reynolds replied smoothly. "Furthermore, I would use my influence to secure you a legitimate position with the railroad, one with far better prospects than ranch management." The offer hung in the air between them. Fiona watched various emotions cross Preston's face: anger, temptation, disgust, before settling into resolve. "No," Preston said simply. Reynolds' composure slipped. "You're refusing." "Do you understand what I'm offering?" "Perfectly," Preston replied. "You're offering to trade my integrity for comfort and security. The answer is no." "Don't be a fool, Blackwell," Reynolds snapped. "One word from me, and those charges will be reinstated. You could spend years in prison while your new bride waits faithfully, or perhaps not so faithfully, for your return." Fiona stepped forward, anger overcoming caution. "Mr. Reynolds, I believe it's time for you to leave." Reynolds ignored her, focusing on Preston. "Think carefully about your decision. This offer expires when I walk out that door." "Then it's already expired," Preston said, moving to open the front door pointedly. "Good day, Mr. Reynolds." For a moment, it seemed Reynolds might continue arguing, but something in Preston's unyielding expression made him reconsider. He gathered his hat and gloves, pausing at the doorway. "You'll regret this," he warned. "Both of you." "The only thing I would regret," Preston replied evenly, "is compromising my principles for a man who has none." After Reynolds departed, Aunt Martha excused herself to the kitchen, leaving the newlyweds alone in the parlor. Fiona sank onto the sofa, the events of the day finally overwhelming her composure. "Did we just make things worse?" she asked softly. Preston sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Probably," he admitted. "But I couldn't accept his offer, Fiona. Not just because it would betray Harrington, but because once Reynolds had that hold over me, he'd never let go. We'd be under his thumb forever." "I know," she assured him. "I wouldn't have wanted you to accept. I just worry about what he'll do next. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Preston's thumb gently caressed her wedding band. "For better or worse, remember?" "I remember," Fiona whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And I don't regret a single moment." The following morning brought unexpected news. A telegram arrived from Tucson addressed to Preston, delivered by a breathless messenger boy to Aunt Martha's house. "It's from Theodore Mitchell," Preston explained as he read it. His expression shifted from concern to disbelief, then to cautious hope. "Harold Mitchell died 3 days ago." "What?" Fiona moved to read over his shoulder. The telegram was brief but clear. "Brother Harold passed suddenly. Stop heart failure. Stop before death confirmed your agreement valid. Stop position at broken. Spoke still yours. If wanted stop come immediately to discuss. Stop Theodore Mitchell. This changes everything." Preston breathed, looking up at Fiona. With Harold Mitchell's confirmation before his death, Reynolds' forgery accusation falls apart completely. "And the broken spoke position is still available," Fiona added, hope blooming in her chest. Preston's eyes shone with renewed determination. "We should leave for Tucson immediately. Theodore Mitchell won't hold the position long if we delay." "What about the charges here?" "I'll take this telegram to Sheriff Tanner before we depart," Preston decided. "With Mitchell's death, Reynolds loses his primary witness against me, especially since Theodore has Harold's final confirmation of our agreement." Events moved quickly after that. Sheriff Tanner, presented with the telegram and Theodore Mitchell's earlier letters, officially dismissed all charges against Preston. Jacob Harrington provided a wagon and fresh horses for their journey to Tucson, while Aunt Martha helped Fiona pack their limited belongings. By noon, they were ready to depart. A small group gathered to see them off, friends who had stood by them through the ordeal, neighbors who had resisted Reynolds' attempts to turn the town against them. "You'll write when you're settled?" Aunt Martha asked, embracing Fiona tightly. "Every week," Fiona promised, "and we'll visit when we can." "Take care of each other," Harrington advised, shaking Preston's hand firmly. "The broken spoke is a fine opportunity, but Tucson has its own challenges." "We're ready to face them," Preston assured him. As they prepared to climb into the wagon, a commotion at the end of the street caught their attention. Alexander Reynolds was approaching rapidly on horseback, his expression thunderous. "Blackwell," he shouted as he drew near. "You think you've won." Preston stepped protectively in front of Fiona. "There's nothing to win, Reynolds. It's over." "Nothing is over until I say it is," Reynolds snarled, dismounting. "You've humiliated me, cost me valuable time and influence. There will be consequences." "The only consequences have been of your own making," Preston replied calmly. "The forgery charges have been dismissed. Mitchell's confirmation before his death cleared my name completely." "Mitchell was an old fool," Reynolds spat. "And you're nothing but a cowboy playing at respectability. You don't deserve what you have." "That's where you're wrong," Fiona said, moving to stand beside Preston. "He deserves everything good in this world because he's earned it through honesty and hard work, concepts you clearly don't understand." Reynolds' face contorted with rage. "You could have had everything with me," he said bitterly. "Instead, you chose dust and cattle and struggling for scraps." "I chose love," Fiona corrected him. "Something you've never offered anyone because you don't know how." For a moment, something vulnerable flashed across Reynolds' face, a glimpse of loneliness quickly masked by renewed anger. "You'll regret this choice when winter comes, and your cowboy can't keep food on your table." "The only regret we'd have had," Preston said quietly, "was if we danced to your tune instead of our own." He helped Fiona into the wagon, then turned back to Reynolds. "Goodbye, Mr. Reynolds. I hope you find peace with yourself someday." As Preston climbed up beside her and took the reins, Fiona caught a final glimpse of Reynolds standing alone in the street, watching them with an expression of mingled rage and loss. "Do you think he'll ever understand?" she asked softly as they pulled away. Some men never do, Preston replied. They measure worth by possessions rather than character, by control rather than connection. It's sad in a way, Fiona mused, to have so much and yet understand so little about what truly matters. Preston's hand found hers as the wagon rolled out of Dry Creek, heading south toward their future. We have everything that matters right here, he said simply. The journey to Tucson took 3 days, traveling at a steady pace through territory that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Fiona. The desert landscape changed subtly different plants, different rock formations, the mountains rising differently against the horizon. Throughout it all, Preston's presence beside her made even the unknown feel like home. They arrived in Tucson on a bright morning, the bustling town so much larger than Dry Creek that Fiona felt momentarily overwhelmed. After securing rooms at a modest hotel, Preston left to meet with Theodore Mitchell while Fiona explored the nearby shops, imagining the life they might build here. Preston returned mid-afternoon, his expression triumphant. "It's done," he announced as he entered their room. "Theodore Mitchell has honored his brother's agreement completely. The position at Broken Spoke is ours with the partnership option intact. That's wonderful." Fiona exclaimed, rushing to embrace him. "When do we start?" "Immediately. Theodore is taking me to the ranch tomorrow to introduce me to the hands." Preston's eyes shone with excitement. "And there's more. The manager's house is larger than we expected. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, even a small room that could serve as your sewing studio." "My sewing studio." Theodore mentioned the ranch hands are always needing repairs, and the nearest seamstress is in Tucson, Preston explained. "I might have mentioned my wife's exceptional skills in that department. He seemed quite interested in having that service available at the ranch." Fiona's heart swelled with love for this man who thought not only of his own opportunities but of hers as well. "It sounds perfect," she said softly. "It won't be easy," Preston cautioned, ever practical. "The ranch needs work, the house probably does too. We'll be starting from scratch in many ways." "But we'll be starting together," Fiona replied, reaching up to touch his face. "That makes all the difference." Their kiss sealed this new beginning, tender at first, then deepening with promise and passion as Preston lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed. Their wedding night had been postponed by circumstances beyond their control, but now, with their future secure before them, they could finally begin their life together in every sense. Later, as they lay contentedly in each other's arms, Fiona thought back to the night that had brought them together, the rejection at the dance hall, Preston's bold declaration that they would dance in the dust outside. How fitting that their love story had begun with defiance and courage, the very qualities that had carried them through to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, noticing her smile. "I was remembering our first dance," she replied. "How everything changed in that moment when you said we'd dance in the dust outside." Preston's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Best decision I ever made." "Do you think we'll be happy at Broken Spoke?" Fiona asked, her thoughts turning to their future. "I think we'll make it a place where happiness can grow," Preston answered thoughtfully. "Just like we did with our love, starting from unexpected beginnings and building something beautiful." The following morning, they traveled to the Broken Spoke Ranch, located 20 miles outside Tucson in a valley blessed with reliable water and good grazing land. As they crested the final hill, the ranch spread out before them, a collection of sturdy buildings centered around a main house, with corrals, barns, and bunkhouses arranged in practical fashion. Theodore Mitchell, a weathered man in his 60s who shared his late brother's shrewd eyes but none of his fickleness, met them at the entrance. "Welcome to your new home," he said simply, offering his hand to Preston. The ranch hands gathered to meet their new manager, sizing Preston up with the caution typical of men who had seen leadership change before. Yet something in Preston's straightforward introduction and clear knowledge of ranching seemed to satisfy them, and by midday, he was deep in conversation about cattle conditions and grazing rotations. Meanwhile, Theodore showed Fiona the manager's house, a solidly built structure with simple but comfortable furnishings. The promised second bedroom was there, along with a small adjoining space that would indeed make a perfect sewing room with its large windows providing excellent natural light. "It needs a woman's touch," Theodore acknowledged as they toured the house. "My sister-in-law passed 5 years ago, and Harold wasn't one for decorating." "It's wonderful," Fiona assured him, already envisioning curtains she could make, rugs that would add warmth, flowers she might plant outside the kitchen window. By evening, when Preston joined her to explore their new home together, Fiona had already begun creating lists of necessities and improvements. They walked through each room, making plans, sharing ideas, their excitement building with every step. On the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Preston wrapped his arms around Fiona from behind, resting his chin on her head. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against him. "Are you?" "More than I ever imagined possible." His voice held wonder and gratitude in equal measure. "When I asked you to dance in the dust that night, I never dreamed it would lead us here." "Perhaps not," Fiona agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "But I think, somehow, our hearts knew even then that we were meant for this journey together." As darkness settled over their new home, Preston Blackwell and his wife Fiona stood on the threshold of their future, a future built on love, strengthened by adversity, and now stretching before them with unlimited promise. They had begun with a dance in the dust outside a door that wouldn't open for them. Now, they had opened their own door to a life of their own, making one where they would always dance together, whether in grand ballrooms or beneath open skies, for all the days to come.